Hey, this is Zachlog the Great, and I am here tonight with my friend Nate
Hello.
and with Travis.
Hello.
And we are getting together tonight to talk about um, uh, Rudyard Kipling's poem, The Beginnings, which Nate has volunteered to read for us. As usual, before we go to that, um, if you like my work, if you enjoy these or my other videos, um, please visit subscribestar.com/Zachlog-the-great, and you can sign up to support me for between $1 and $5 a month. And having said that, yeah, I will put the poem up for everybody to see, and we will let Nate do the reading tonight. So, that's the one. Okay, let me know when you see it.
Here it is.
Got it.
Okay.
The beginning, 1914 to 1918. It was not part of their blood. It came to them very late, with long arrears to make good, when the English began to hate. They were not easily moved. They were icy willing to wait, till every count should be proved, ere the English began to hate. Their voices were even and low, their eyes were level and straight. There was neither sign nor show when the English began to hate. It was not preached to the crowd, it was not taught by the state. No man spake it aloud when the English began to hate. It was not suddenly bred, it will not swiftly abate. Through the chill years ahead, when time shall count from the date when the English began to hate.
Okay. Thank you, Nate. And before we go much further, I have to make an apology or a I don't know, correction. I'm a little bit embarrassed on this one. When I recorded this, something over 2 years ago. When I recorded this, I recorded it with the title "The Wrath of the Awakened Saxon," which is not the title that Kipling published under. It's a commonly circulated version these days. It was not the one that Kipling. It was not what Kipling wrote. What? And the only other thing different was that English was changed to Saxon, and so that was not the version Kipling wrote. And I feel a little embarrassed that I did the incorrect version there, but. Having said that, Travis, would you like to lead off with your first thoughts here?
I'll start off with a question. What is the Mary Postgate, a diversity of creatures, about? The line of below 1914 to 1918.
I don't know. If I had to guess, I would say that might be the book that this was published in first.
Yeah, that might be it.
It sounds kind of like Mary Postgate, a book by Rudyard Kipling. Mary Postgate has been called Kipling's finest war story about a spinster whose son is killed in a trial flight during the war. So yeah, that's the apparently the title of this of the book this appeared in.
And it was a novel?
Like?
War story, it said.
Let's see, just a moment. I guess I don't. I feel like I should start doing a little more research before we go on these, because
But I mean, it's not a big deal. It was just a curiosity for me.
yeah, I don't know. I guess it might be a novel, and this was included in there. I don't know. But anyway, what else were you thinking about this one?
It seems to say the same thing a lot. I guess is one thing I would say. I mean, it's not like a lot of new information is given. It's just stated a little differently in each stanza.
I can kind of see that, and I think that's definitely deliberate, that it's he's trying to make this one point very clear. He's trying to emphasize this was not something that happened quickly. This was not something this was not anger without cause, and this is not something that just whipped up out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, it fits the theme of what he's saying, which is showing sort of the sedimentary nature of this. It's like thin layers laid down over a long time.
And do we know specifically what he is referring to? I mean, is this something to do with World War I, given the dates?
Given the date, I would say that this, I mean, it kind of has to be about the English entering World War I. I don't really know, what else he would be writing about. Writing about, with this kind of title and theme. So yeah, I think this would be and just a little bit of extra context to go with this, because this was the written or published 1917 in that novel, and one of Rudyard Kipling's only son actually died in the war. His only son, John Kipling, died in 1915. So that I cannot. I hope I'm never going to know what that feels like. But
I think I'm also on board with the opinion that's talking about the enmity bred in World War I, or the Great War, as they called it. Although I'm not sure what's so great about it. It wasn't particularly well managed.
Well,
I think it was the size, was the great in size. I think is what they were referring to.
And then World War II happened, and they had to degrade it to the pretty good war.
That's funny.
The cracking Great War. But no, I mean, the thing about it is this whole idea of it, seeding future hatred, and that it's going to burn, for lifetimes, is fairly evident in the fact that World War I had to be done over again, but bigger. All this laid down, World War I didn't really solve anything. It didn't release any of the tensions. It just sort of put them in the pressure cooker. World War I was like peeling the potatoes to make a stew of horror, in the 1930s. Just chop it all up, chuck it in the pot, and let simmer for 2 or 3 decades.
Well, there was actually a who was this? I kind of disagree with him on the cause of this, but he was almost dead on the dates. There was a French general, Ferdinand Foch. I don't speak French. Foch. There was a French general, Ferdinand Foch, commenting on the Treaty of Versailles that officially ended the war, and he said, "This isn't a peace. This is a 20-year armistice." And I mean, it wasn't exactly 20 years, but he was pretty accurate on that. So,
well, yeah. I mean, that's the thing about a peace. If you Lincoln had the right idea. You want peace without rancor. You want to heal the wounds rather than put your boot on somebody's neck, because eventually.
I do want to say, having lived in the South for like 10 years now, he didn't pull that off.
Well, that's because a Democrat shot him.
Well,
saying
whether he would have done better personally, I don't know, but they didn't pull it off. We know that much.
Hey, look. It's not our fault that after the War of Northern Aggression, they decided to come down here and try and steal our ancestral lands after they set them on fire. Damn it, Sherman.
But
anyway.
Go ahead.
Well, no, and that's the thing, is he had the right idea, but again, what you ended up with was, a bunch of people trying to take advantage of it and trying to make the peace punitive. If your peace is punitive, it's not peace.
Well, and that's actually what I was saying about Folk, because he was actually of the opinion that the terms were too generous to Germany.
Well.
But I also wanted to note
for all the wrong reasons.
I am still drinking the only thing we're allowed to drink right now. Hopefully we'll be allowed, or at least the only thing we're allowed to think about right now. Hopefully in another couple of weeks things will be slightly more normal.
So, do you think this English hatred is towards the Germans?
That seems like what he's talking about to me. I mean,
and why do they suddenly hate the Germans? Have the Germans been abusing them for many, many, many years? I don't know that much about the history of World War I. I just know that I've spoken to two people independently recently who informed me that World War I was basically just everybody with bad intentions going after for as much as they could get. It wasn't any kind of there was no noble party in the war.
Okay, so
it was less about, well, I mean, there's always the whole what can we get out of this angle, but mostly it was a mess of alliance webs that just sort of, as people came in, their alliances dragged other people in. They all had to fight because they were treaty bound to. And also, there's the whole idea that, hey, we can't let these Hun bastards take over Europe.
If you want to learn a fair bit, if you want to get a good overview and a dramatic overview, for that matter, of World War I would very much suggest looking up Dan Carlin's podcast. He has a series on World War I called Blueprint for Armageddon, and he covers, and that includes how the war got started, which, among other things, includes a guy going for a sandwich. If this one guy had not decided to get a sandwich at a particular shop, might not have happened. Although, yeah, I don't know.
Or would have happened different.
I mean, they always say the assassination of that Serbian something or other prince is what really tipped it off. But
well, the deal is that's what sparked one of the things that led to one of the sort of minor wars that then brought in larger powers, that then brought in another team of larger powers. So would these wars, would a lot of these nations have gone to war with one another in the near future? Probably. Would it have been as much as it was if they hadn't all come to the block at the same time? No. And then there's the question of what would it done? Maybe the destabilizations in Russia would have, allowed them to actually defeat the Bolshevik Revolution, and maybe we wouldn't have had the Cold War and communism, and so we wouldn't have had to hear Bernie Sanders talk about pudding.
Oh yeah. In terms of a
whole lot of things hinge on that one dude's sandwich craving.
Yeah, in terms of after effects, honestly, it sounds weird, but World War I itself is relatively minor compared to the fact that as part of destabilizing Russia, Germany sent Lenin? Yeah. Wait, was it Lenin or something?
Lenin, Trotsky, and a couple other guys.
Yeah. Germany sent Lenin and Trotsky into Russia as destabilizing agents, and they set off the communist revolution. No World War I, no communists. Oh, how much better life would be today. But
and China would still be a bunch of rice farmers instead of, sending us viruses every couple of years. But that's not about the poem. I think a lot of the slow burning, slow building hatred that he talks about is just every telegram home, we're sorry, your son has died, in combat, blah, 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 blah. You do that a million.
And like I said, he felt that one himself.
Yeah.
And that's so not an abstract thing to him.
And so, you do that a couple of million times, and that'll stoke some hate. Each one is a little ember of hate that can, just kind of set the whole place on fire. And so even after World War II, which honestly seems like a better reason to hate, because at that point, yes, that was just evil on the march. That was 100% naked ambition and bad faith and intent. But it was righteously defeated, and then immediately after, you had to sort of unify as fast as you could against the growing menace of your former allies. So it kind of, rather than continue to hate you, we have to go ahead and rebuild you and hope we can make you a friend, or at least, make you a good solid buffer. So it's interesting, the change there, because like I said, I feel like World War II should leave you more hateful. You attack the sacred soil of Britain. But at the same time, in the immediate aftermath of World War I, there's only the mourning of the dead, and sort of the hard satisfaction that, well, we put them down and they're going to stay down because we regulated them into oblivion. They're guilty. But in the end, they went down, fighting, and they went down via treaty, not via conquest like they did in the Second World War. So I don't know. I guess it just left a lot of unfulfillment there. And so the hatred could remain because in the end, it wasn't complete. That's just me talking.
And then the U.S. decided, we're going to finish World War II conclusively.
Well, on the one side, it's a Luger bullet to the jaw. And on the other side, it's, nuclear fire.
But what was this? Is actually this poem reminds me of, or now this is backwards because I saw this before I saw that video. There's a channel I follow occasionally called Black Pilled, and he does I don't know quite what to call it. It's like it's not a movie review quite, because it's not like he's not trying to tell you, oh, I liked it because this and that. It's kind of he kind of goes through a lot of movies and goes through the symbolism and like the message that they're trying to push with this. And since it's coming out of Hollywood, it's usually a ugly kind of message. But he does he in his video, he did one on Office Space, and he said the thing with white guys is like they talk about people snapping and suddenly jumping to these like horrible plans, and at the end of that movie the guy burns the office down. He says, no, it's not this sudden decision, this sudden impulse to violence. Okay. And he says, and the movie shows that because if you pay attention, pretty early on, the guy says about burning down the place. He mutters this, when someone does some petty, nasty thing to him. And he says, no, what happens with us is, very early on, we come up with these extreme solutions, and then we say, no, we're not doing that yet.
But you got to remember the yet.
Yeah, but then you peel off other options, and we'll get there. And so like and I kind of feel like that's what he's talking about. Is like, we didn't want to do this. This wasn't the plan. This isn't our natural inclination. But you peel off other options, and you will find out quite how nasty we can be. And so I kind of feel that's that kind of connects to this poem for me personally.
I was not sure where you were going from that starting point, but yeah, I think we arrived at the same place. That was an interesting one.
But the poem itself never quite gets there.
Okay.
Oh, this is called the beginnings. It's not called the end.
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah, he says like, well, and that's the thing. It's kind of the I've referred to it, on these talks before, because I spend too much time on the website TV Tropes. And I think, kind of the one that is applicable here would be Nothing is Scarier, where, there's some, horrible monster or some, dreadful fate, but they never actually show it to you. They build it up, and then they leave it off screen, and then your imagination fills it in. And I kind of think that's what he's kind of doing here, because it's like, you don't see what it is. You just know that when this happens, they're gonna reset calendars from that point. Is how big a deal this is gonna be.
That's one of the things. I said a bit of that good old timey racism, and it's not like it's kind of the soft ones. We are the noble race. We don't engage in these petty grudges, but when we do, it's gonna be epic, and that we have cause, and everyone else should know that you have cause for fear. And so it's like, look, guys, I am sure you British folks have hated plenty. You went to war with the French for 800 years. And pretty much the only thing that could stop you shanking the French as often as possible and being shanked by them to mutual hate was the Germans. Twice. I mean, come on. The British learned to hate when the Normans came across the Channel. However,
Well, okay.
Travis?
Oh, I thought he was finishing something there with the however.
I'm a big fan of the hanging, however, as a sort of let people come to their own conclusions during the interstice.
I mean, it's you're going back, with the history, with French and whatever, but it's like the British with all of their colonization. I mean, everybody that they ever took over learned to hate them. I mean, it's kind of interesting to read a poem about the British hatred. Obviously it's written by a Brit, and he's got whatever connection to that. But if you went and looked at any of these peoples that they conquered, their hate has either simmered in a similar way or been loud and raucous and created, the American experiment.
I don't think it's so much we learned to hate the British, it's that we had a very heated argument with them. It's like, hey, thanks for your basis in common law and the Magna Carta, but you need to do more than that, and stop taking my dough, you jerks.
Yeah, I think we've made up since then. There was quite a dispute, but we're pretty well friends now.
We've reconciled with old Dad, and we're like, come on, Pops, let's go beat up some Ruskies.
Yeah, but I'm talking about that time. I mean, it wasn't like, I mean, that was a culmination of many things before the spark flew and we did our thing with them. But I don't know. When you start talking hate, it's a very, I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for, but it's a blanket. It's a blanket word, I guess, is what I would say. And to say that we didn't hate the British, if you talk to most common men at that time, they all hated the British in their speech.
Actually, half of them wanted to remain British.
All right. Well, that half perhaps did not.
That's the thing.
But anyone whose father or brother was killed in the war, there's that hate. I mean, we carry hate around but I think it is an accumulation, just like you're talking about, like this poem, and it's sort of this accumulation, and it builds, and it's like you're offended once, and it's like, okay, and then you're offended again, and then they kill your dog,
and then we start John Wick.
Yeah, and I see what you're saying, and also, it's poetic license, is what it is, because yes. Did the average Briton go around even during the depths of the war, like with their fist clenched, just like dirty Huns? No, they went about their lives as best they could. Knowing the great wheels of history were grinding men's lives away, there on the other side of the water, and that, who knew who was going to be next? Would they receive word about their son or their brother or their father or, their best friend or their husband? Who knew? And so, like I said, poetic license, the author obviously learned to hate. He's not letting this go. And so, to his mind, this very common experience must have affected everyone the same way. I mean, how can you live through this without learning to hate? And if so many of us have learned to hate, then as a nation, we have learned to hate. And sure, it may not hold up for 100% truth, but in the end, all poetry breaks down if you scrutinize it to the gnat's ass. You kind of got to leave a bit of blanket. You can't get too granular with it because, like you're saying, it does break down. I mean, not every Briton hates Germany. Not every American hates Britain. Even back in the colonial days.
Well, I don't think the basics of it break down. I mean, the basics of hate building, and you keep it in and you don't show it off, and then it keeps building. It's like, I think hate generally works that way.
Well, and the other, I think another point of this poem, because you said like it's kind of saying the same thing one 4 times, um, and the other point of that is like like it says at the end, it was not suddenly bred, it will not swiftly abate. Like this wasn't one thing and you're suddenly angry about it, and then like 2 minutes later you're like, oh wow, I really overreacted, I'm sorry. This is like a series of things building up, a series of offenses building up, a series of resentments piling on to
That's the
create
poison apple that we discussed in that previous poem.
Sorry, go ahead.
What was that?
It's the poison fruit, described in that previous poem that we did. I mean, he even talks about, we gave him every chance to, diffuse this. We wanted to make sure we were right. And now that we hate with perfect certainty that we are in the right and we're within our rights to hate.
And yeah,
so they have fully, the poison apple sits there, in its shiny splendor, waiting for some poor schmuck to kill himself with it.
And to go to connect this a little bit to current events, I think that there are if you guys know the names of Rotherham and Telford, do you guys know those have you heard of those towns, either of you?
I do not.
Nate?
I feel very suspicious that I've heard of them, but I can't bring them to mind.
Well, I'm sure there's many lovely things about these places, but unfortunately for the people there, they're well known as being emblematic of what's probably a much larger problem in England, which is Muslim immigrant, Muslim rape gangs.
Oh, okay, those places. You could have just said Sweden.
Well, yeah, but this is the English. That's the poem here, and so there's these gangs that have been operating in England for decades, of Muslims and preying upon young English girls, and for a long time the English legal system has done absolutely nothing.
I'm start English, this is for you, all you Englishmen there. It's time to start killing people. I am advocating violence because it's righteous violence, and you can't let people do that.
Yeah, this has been going on for decades.
You're going to monetize the hell out of this.
Oh, I haven't been monetized for a couple of years now, so I don't have to pay attention to that. No. All I have to pay attention to is, are they actually going to kick me off, or at least kick that video off? I've lost one. Fortunately, I have it on another platform. So if you're worried that this channel might entirely disappear, which I worry about that, you can also find me on BitChute, bitchute.com, and bit.tube. There's two places that if YouTube decides to finally entirely kick me off, there's two other places you can find these. Anyway, but yeah, it's like, guys, I think it's time to actually start hating. If there is such a thing as justified hatred, we're there, and
regardless if you call it hatred or not, I mean, I think part of the reason things become hatred, like you said earlier about like you lose it and you're like, okay, I'm sorry, I overreacted there. Like, if the authorities in England let that sort of thing continue to happen, the everyday people are going to start to hate, and they're going to hate every single Muslim, and they're not going to see the difference between someone in a gang and someone who's not. So if the English aren't actually doing their job and punishing crimes, it creates more hate when you don't actually punish it to properly crimes, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, and if this was, addressed as soon as these
Exactly.
these were known,
it
then you would punish those men, and everyone else would probably still be able to get along. That's not what's going to happen eventually. Right. Now.
Yeah, get out your pitchforks and narwhal horns.
What is a narwhal? Is that an animal?
That is a whale that has this long tooth that grows out of its face.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that was what the guy stabbed the terrorist with on the bridge. Yeah.
Narwhal horn. I was like, okay, I have so many questions. What? Where do you get a narwhal horn? What are you using it for? Other than, and what are the odds that some dude's like, I'm going to stab a lot of people today. And then he gets out there and he's like getting shanked with a narwhal horn. Like, you've got to be freaking kidding me.
What movie is this from?
No, this is reality.
Oh, this is reality.
This is
reality.
There was
a terror. Was it a knife? I don't remember what he did.
Okay.
And he was actually.
The narwhal horn was effective. It's longer than the knife. You just stick it in him and push him away from you. Like, nope.
You've got reach. Was it a diversity conference or something too? Am I imagining that?
I got to imagine that's one of the most diverse attacks and defenses I've ever seen in my life. So,
yes, okay. So to explain this to Travis, there was this, and it was the religion of peace. Once again, and he
peace.
The guy was like, going on a violent, like just stabbing anyone basically within reach, and two Englishmen, because guys, this is why we have the Second Amendment. If this happened in America, that would have ended very quickly, and the guy would have had a bullet, not a narwhal horn in him. But anyway, and he was stopped by someone attacking him with. He was stopped by someone who got that, and there was something else. There was some other improvised weapon, but I don't remember what it was.
Backpack. I seem to remember like this one strap of a backpack going wild while the actual bag part is like hitting him in the chest, and he's getting like shoved over the rail with a narwhal horn. I'm like, you poor bastards. I was like, this is unreal. I mean, hey, props to you for saying, you know what? I'm going to fight you like goddamn Gandalf. Let's go.
I mean, yeah, the guy who actually did it, like, good for you. I'm glad you didn't stand by and watch this. But guys, this is why we have our guns in America. Okay, this is why we get very touchy whenever someone looks like they're trying to take them, because we don't want to have to reach for random crap that happens to be lying around to defend ourselves.
I'm dying. And by the way, American, clearly knife control doesn't work.
But who was the attacker? I missed that.
The guy with the knife was the attacker. The guy with
yes, I get that. But like, what was his purpose for attacking? Like, who was
terror?
Okay.
I believe he described his cause as Allahu Akbar.
I thought he was trying to get some treats with Aladdin down at the Agrabah snack bar, but I might have just heard that wrong.
Let's see. Usman Khan. 28. And now I've run into anyway. Usman Khan, stopped by Darren Frost using a narwhal tusk. I have to say, Darren Frost kind of sounds like an action hero. That sounds like the hero of an action movie. I can see someone with that name being played by Jason Statham.
You're right.
We have gone far afield.
I'm surprised the narwhal tusk is even legal to be owned.
It's very spear-like.
I assume it was a
Presumably
decoration. I assume no one looked at it and said,
No. I just mean because it comes from an animal that I don't know is, I feel like it's probably fairly rare, but it may not be at all.
Well, and also if it was there for 50 or 100 years, it may have been there.
Yeah, right.
That's a grandpappy Frost narwhal's horn there. took it, brought it home from the Mexican.
If anyone in England is listening, guys, there's been sufficient provocation. You got to do something, okay? I'm not going to say what that something is, but
I will.
standing back and taking it. No, there's been sufficient provocation. It's time to reset the calendar when time shall count from the date that the English began to hate. I mean, geez.
I think we have taken this as a missionary video. We've gone around the world.
These are the people who conquered so much of the planet that it was literally true. The sun never set on the British Empire, and 100 years later, you're allowing this other people to come into your country and do this to you. Guys, no, come on. Remember where you came from, please.
Remember who you are. Man. But yeah, as I said, there are provocations to this in the modern day, and it'll happen. I think this is a good cautionary tale, too, that even the most civilized people, even the stiffest of upper lips and the most, rational demeanor, and the most sort of outwardly placid, can be eventually roused to anger and unyielding fury.
Well, and the other thing is,
it's once they slip the brake, and really get this thing into gear, they've built up a bunch of power. They're sitting there, just slowly pushing down the throttle, pushing it down, pressure's building up, and once they let go of the controls, it's going to explode. It's going to accelerate very, very quickly.
You could look at terrorists the same way. I mean, they've got their hate, and that's what that stems from, and it comes, whenever you bring it down to individuals, it is curious, why some people, I guess you're always going to have your radicals, you might call it, the people who are a little touchier than other people. You've got the bulk of the people that are kind of reasonable, and then you've got your fringes that are not so reasonable. And the reasons for that, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure you could spend a lifetime studying the reasons for that in any given scenario, but it's curious. I mean, that capacity for hate is in us all. I mean, that anger is it's an elemental part of who we are as humans. And as I've learned, it's there so that we can defend ourselves.
It is sort of the idea of last resort. ideally, you take care of things before they develop that far. You
Right.
you say the thing, you do the thing. You say, hey, look, and you stand up and go, I'm not going to stand for this anymore. This needs to stop. And once you do that, most people are willing to be like, oh, either, oh dear, I didn't realize what I was doing, or, okay, I'm going to pick on somebody else if they're that kind of jerk. Most people, when you confront them, with this growing, you're growing upset with it, will stop and do something else. There are not a whole lot of people who are willing to stand up and let it develop further because they understand this, that, says they've taken the reasonable action, and if I keep this up, they'll take unreasonable action. And either, like I said, they're a person of goodwill who genuinely didn't understand, or they're a coward who wants to pick on somebody they think is an easy mark and realize you're not. Sometimes the person just wants to keep going because they want to dominate. And at that point, you have few other recourses. Like I said, it's the response of last resort.
Well, and the other thing, and I've talked about this a few times before, I think, Christianity, I think what a lot of us are taught these days is, the church of, I called it recently the church of nice. And, we're not, we as Christians were never called to be nice. And, Jesus, didn't, come to earth and, didn't, get crucified so everyone could be nice. We're supposed to be good. And that's a rather different and a rather more difficult thing. And sometimes being good involves not being nice at all.
No, Jesus was not a nice man. The idea of the nice guy, the kind of, scuff your toe, do what it takes to get along, non-confrontational guy. There's another word for that, and that's weak man. Says, at least if that's your response to everything. Most of the time, trying to get along is great. Being nice, striving to be a nice person, okay, fine. To behave in a nice fashion, great. Except for when it's not. Most times being nice is perfectly acceptable, but when it's not acceptable to try and be nice it's destruction. If not of you, then of someone else. And so, like Sean was saying, good is not nice. Nice is not necessarily good. And so you got to know the difference.
So I think a lot of that is often determined by culture, time period, sometimes, like what nice is, at least.
Well, yeah, and it's, what's the, what virtues, what particular, kind of, person is, held up as a model. And, like I said, for a lot of people today, well, you're just supposed to be nice, and you're not supposed to offend anyone, and you're not supposed to, you're not supposed to, no matter the provocation, you're not supposed to hit them. Well, most of the time, yeah. Most of the time, no, you shouldn't. That shouldn't be the first thing you go to. But there are some things where you should hit back. And
there's something you should front. Like I said, there are some provocations that are reasonably answered with force. To the fact that it says, and if you want to think about that any further, go to the fact that our laws in America, in most places, have clauses for fighting words. You know, things you can say to a person that justify them decking you. So, I mean, what you're talking about nice being predicated on culture, that's more about propriety. And we have in our Western culture, pretty much conflated the two. To be proper is to be nice. Whereas before, proper was being chaste and dressing in a certain way and addressing your elders respectfully and all of that. It's developed into propriety as being nice. But propriety has not a whole lot of actual moral weight behind it if it's not founded on a good moral system. Lewis had an interesting talk about that. I think it's part of Mere Christianity, but he's talking about Christian sexuality. That's pretty interesting. And he talks about the difference between proper. He's talking about it in terms of chastity, and saying that chastity is always the same thing. But propriety changes based where you are in the time. Your actual location and the actual time you live in, because ideas of what is proper change over time. Check out the Victorians in one century and then the flappers in another century, right? Propriety changes. Or say a Polynesian girl, the expectations of what she's going to walk around in and how she's going to behave around people versus a Mormon girl of the same time, right, is going to be different between cultures, but chastity is always the same thing. And so it's just like this, moral good is not going to change, but the idea of what is proper, and the proper way to behave as a good citizen will change. And so even if the sort of idea of propriety changes to embrace immorality, it doesn't matter. It's still immoral.
Right. That makes sense.
So, I don't know. I think I wouldn't say I've covered everything I wanted to say about this, but I think we've covered a lot.
I covered a lot of things you didn't expect to talk about.
And it's probably time to wrap up. So how about Travis, any closing thoughts here?
Oh, I suppose I do not have any great closing thoughts here. I've said enough.
Nate, any last thoughts on this one?
Seeing if I could dig up any more recycled Lewis that fits the bill. Man, we've wandered so far from our starting point. I'm just worried about getting home before dark.
Well, in that case, then I will just say, kind of like I said before, you shouldn't be quick to anger. In fact, I'm pretty sure that was, that's said in the Bible, and that's attributed to God. Slow to anger. That's a good characteristic to have. It shouldn't be something that's stirred up quickly. But we have anger, for a reason, and it needs to be there. And so, when properly provoked, there is there is an appropriate when provoked enough, there is an appropriate response. And I'm not going to say I would like it. I am of a sensitive enough nature that I probably would be troubled by it, but I think such things need to come at some point. Anyway. And thank you both for joining me, and God be with you.
And also with you.